Art can mean different things to different people. For me, it's all about the joy of creativity. So if you draw, paint, write, dance, sing, craft, play air guitar, or even sculpt using nothing more than mashed potatoes, consider yourself an artist and join our conversation. For the next half hour, meet the artist and learn about their inspiration while we all enjoy the beauty of creativity. Welcome to Season 2 of Art Talk with John Cole Artist. Hey, good evening, everyone. It's John Cole Artist broadcasting tonight. It's May 28th, maybe? Yeah, it is May 28th, 2024. First off, I want to say thank you, everybody, for joining me this evening, and for those folks that will watch this on replay later, and those folks that just happen to want to check out past episodes, because they can be found on both YouTube and Facebook, on the John Cole Artist Facebook page, and of course on Spotify. And Christine's on board tonight. Hello, Christine. Hello, beautiful, talented, amazing soul. Thank you, sweetheart. I appreciate that. So last week we talked with Mark de Cordoba about his upcoming book, and a couple weeks earlier we talked to Heather Doran. Heather Doran's book is coming out tomorrow on Amazon. It's going to be an amazing book, so by all means check it out. She's been doing a really good job of promoting her book, and I've got no doubt that she's just going to be selling spectacularly and really helping a lot of people, because that's really what it's all about, right? Whether or not we write things or we do artwork, it's all about the joy of doing the thing, and of course, the joy that we receive when other people have joy from looking at it or hanging it on their wall or sculpting or whatever, right? It's all about the joy. So tonight's going to be a really interesting broadcast. So recently I started the art of stained glass, excuse me, which was something that I've never tried before for a number of reasons. Number one, I was kind of scared of it. I think if you're familiar with the whole concept of stained glass, you know, whether or not it's in a church or whether or not it's on your front door, there's always this fear that you're going to break it perhaps, or that it's too hard, or that, you know, because it uses lead-based products, that you're going to, you know, get some kind of disease or something like that, right? Well, I mean, like a lot of other art products that I've talked about in the past, like oil paint's a great example. Over time, things have changed a little bit. So what used to be scary or used to be dangerous isn't really so much of that anymore. That's not to say that stained glass is not, you know, doesn't have its concerns, right? Because you are working with glass, you're not working with plastic or anything like that, but you're actually working with glass. There's always the risk of getting injured. And then you're using a soldering iron, which can get quite hot. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. And of course, the solder that we use does have a portion or a percentage of lead in there. But if you take the right precautions, it's not an issue, right? You can wear gloves when you're handling glass, wear eye protection when you're doing certain things. You know, be in a well-ventilated space when you're doing the soldering and things like that. If you keep all those precautions in mind, which are really not big deals, you can do some pretty amazing things. So like I said, I only started doing this maybe 2-3 weeks ago, and it all started with a kit. So let me tell you right off the bat, there's two different ways, or two different ways that you can approach the stained glass hobby. There's probably more than that, but based on my limited knowledge, there's two ways. The first way is to go to your local hobby shop and buy a stained glass kit like this one. Okay, this was purchased at Hobby Lobby for only $20, and it gives you everything that you need, with the exception of a soldering iron, to make this be. So basically all the glass comes cut, the colors already picked for you. They give you the solder that you need to put all the pieces together. They give you the copper foil, which we'll talk about it a little bit as well. And of course they give you the chain. And what's nice about this is, with all the pieces already cut, you can really do some really nice stained glass work. Okay, so this is that bee that I showed you. So that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it, of course, is the way that I prefer, because I always prefer the hard way over the easy way. Every time I'm going to start a new project, I want to make it complicated to see if I can do it. And then if I fail, well, then I back up a little bit. I try again with something simpler. But the other way is to make your own design. So what we're going to be doing tonight is a couple things. Now, because of the different tools that I needed to put this stained glass project together, To do it in this office space, I would risk getting glass in places I don't want glass. I would risk, because this is a very small space, doing some things that could be problematic for fumes and stuff like that. So a lot of what I do is downstairs in the basement, and then part of what I do is up here in this office space. So in order not to carry around my cell phone up and downstairs and really make this podcast awfully, awfully difficult to manage, what I did was earlier today, I went through and I recorded a video of all the steps up to the demonstration portion. Now, these steps include everything from the design to putting on the copper foil. And then after this video is done, I'm going to go live and we're going to do a little bit of copper foiling and we're going to do a little bit of soldering just so I can show you how everything comes together. So I thought that would be a really good way to address this subject because honestly, it can get a little complicated. So let's go ahead and watch the video. We're going to want a design to start off with. And in my particular case, I used Adobe Illustrator to just create a simple 5x7 design that is reminiscent of the artist Mondrian, Piet Mondrian. He's the one that did the famous Broadway Boogie Woogie, which is currently in the Museum of Modern Art. Now, to keep the straight edges for this stained glass, what I'm using is just a straight edge and a craft knife to go ahead and cut all these pieces out. The straighter the line, the more likely it's going to be that your pieces are going to fit together, and there will always be a little give because no matter how well you cut, things are never as perfect as you want. But we're really not going after perfection here. All we really want to do is get the shapes as close as possible to the original. And what we're going to end up doing with this is taking this, adhering it to our glass, and then cutting around that and then doing some grinding. But I promise I'll get to that in just a few minutes. In the meantime, cut all your pieces out, and if they're, of course, shapes that are curved or that have some convex or concave design work, that's okay too. Now, what I ended up doing after cutting was I placed the paper back on in the right order. You notice I have two copies. I've got the original drawing, and then I also, of course, have a copy that I cut up. And then comes the fun part, which is really with, in my particular case, this drawer of scrap glass, finding pieces that fit the design that I have in my head, the color scheme, right? And if you notice, there is in fact a second pair of hands because Christine, my wife, decided to join me, and I let her pick out all the colors. The thing is, when you're working with scrap glass, be very, very careful of picking up the pieces because a lot of times there are hidden sharp corners. And trust me when I say I've got the scars to prove that. But really the big objective here is to just find the pieces that are going to be the most aesthetically pleasing in this particular design. We chose blues, we chose some greens, and we decided to add a splash of red. And by doing it this way, it's a little bit easier to visualize what our final product is going to look like. So choose wisely or just choose randomly. It doesn't really matter. The point is you're going to pick the colors that are most pleasing to you. Okay, now that we have our colors picked out and we have our pieces, our numbered pieces associated with those colors, we're going to use some of this Elmer's glue stick. This is stuff that you would buy for kids at school, and it's really good for paper crafting. It's water soluble, which means it goes on sticky and it adheres pretty well, but with some water after the fact, it washes right off like it was never there. So the idea here is we're going to glue our papers onto the glass. Now the glass itself, for some reason I always thought that stained glass meant that, it was, if you washed it, the colors would come out. I don't know why I ever thought that, but I did. But there is no issue with sticking glue on the glass or running the glass underwater. It washes right off. But the idea is to get it on there because when we cut, we want to have an idea of where our lines are going to be. And then the step after that, when we actually grind the glass or we smooth it out and we make everything exactly the same as the design that we're looking for, it makes life a lot easier to have your paper just stuck right onto the glass. Now, if you were going to use some other kind of adhesive, maybe some sticker paper, like the Avery stuff that you can buy for your laser printer, your color printer, you can use that too. I don't know how difficult it would be to remove that glue, however. Probably Goo Gone or something like that would work, or if you just let it soak in the sink for a while, the paper would come off. But again, the whole objective is to get your design on the glass. Now you'll notice that in some of these I'm putting it right up against the 90-degree angle if the glass supports that, and that's important because it reduces your grinding time. So that's the next step, is to glue all your stuff on your glass. Next, we're heading down, in my case, into the basement, and this is my grinding work area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the glass. Notice I put safety glasses on first. Please do that. If anything, even if you don't wear gloves, put on safety glasses, because the last thing you want is glass in your eye. So I'm going to use this glass cutter, and this is a glass cutter that can be used with an oil. I tend not to use the oil, and the oil is basically to prevent a lot of excess chipping and stuff like that. But with the small pieces I'm working on, it's not a big deal. You just press, semi-firmly on there to make your design, and then you could use a tool like this, which allows you to snap the glass cleanly right at that break, just like that. And then what I'll do is I'll take the grinding wheel and go ahead and cut off as much glass and as close to my design boundaries as I can. And the reason for that is pretty simple. When we get to the grinding machine, the last thing we want to do is, be grinding, 6 inches worth of material. Trust me when I say it would take all day. So try to get as close to the design as you can. And when you're breaking the glass, there's probably a good chance you're going to snap some pieces now and then. It happens. If you really want the colors you're using and you have very limited supply, be very, very careful, because once the glass breaks, you can't repair it. So do the best you can not to do that. But if it happens, just, use another piece, use a spare, something like that. And you notice in some cases I can just tap and it'll break right off. It makes the process easier. And I think with having the straight lines, it makes it super, super easy. And here's a slowed down normal speed on cutting the glass. And again, I put a little pressure in there. But it's pretty straightforward to just clip it, cut it, done. Okay, next up we have the PowerMax 2 grinder. I picked this up at Hobby Lobby for $119 in tax-free Salem, New Hampshire. Actually, I think it was Nashua, New Hampshire. But it's $120. All it really is just it's just a motor with an axle that has this roughened, diamond-edged grinding wheel there that you can see. And all I'm doing is pushing moderately against that wheel to remove the excess glass from around the pattern. And you have to be a little bit patient with this. Now it is a water-based machine, so I'm plugged in to the left, and then it has water that soaks up through that sponge that you see in the back. And the way the process works is that spinning wheel draws the water from the right-hand side, coating the wheel so that when you cut the glass, all the debris falls inside that grating. So there's water under there. Now, the question is, can you use a Dremel if you have a Dremel device? The answer is yes, you can. And when I first started doing this about 2 weeks ago, that's exactly what I used, was a Dremel. However, with a Dremel without the water, it's really easy to chip the glass. And then, of course, the next step is to wash that glass off. So I'm up here at the sink, and I'm just rinsing all this stuff off and removing all that paper and all that extra glue. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to make sure that these pieces fit. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my original pattern, put them all on there. And it's okay if there's a little bit, if there's gaps here and there, because we're going to be using solder, and solder will be able to melt into the cracks and you won't even notice that there's an issue. And then, of course, the last thing I'm going to do before we get into the actual demonstration part during the podcast tonight is I'm going to use this old picture frame that I have to make sure that my corner is nice and square. I'm going to set my pieces back in, and then I'm going to start to do the copper foiling. So the copper foil itself is going to be used to wrap around all the pieces, and this is the Studio Pro stained glass foiling tape. There it comes in different sizes. This is the 0.56 centimeters because I have thinner glass. And keep that in mind. If you have thicker glass, you might need a wider tape, but they do sell different sizes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully wrap each of my pieces of glass, trying to put the glass as best I can into the center of the tape. And that's important because it is the copper foil that we're going to use with the solder to keep all the pieces together. And the heat from the soldering iron not only melts the solder itself, which is it's a 60-40 blend between tin and lead. So it's something that when we talk about soldering here in a few minutes, I'll get into more details. But this copper foil, the adhesive on the copper foil melts a little bit as well. So the heat not only melts the solder, but it melts the adhesive that's beneath the copper foil. And the end result is you get a very strong bind, right? So two pieces of glass, they're together, and they're together pretty firmly. I mean, it's not something I pull on or jump on or anything like that, but it definitely will keep your glass together. Okay, but what you want to do is use that white thing that I showed there. That's a bone folder. What you use that for is to make sure that your foil is completely pressed on the glass so that it has a very strong seal. And that is everything up to the demonstration, which we're going to start here in a second. So for the demonstration again, I've got two final pieces that I'm going to show you the foiling process, just so you get a real-time view of how that works. And then we're going to do a little bit of soldering. I'll show you the process that I use to get the solder on and some tricks and some tips that I learned just over the last couple weeks doing this. So let me get the other camera on and let's get this demonstration going. Okay, it took me a couple seconds of trying to figure that out. Make sure we can see my hands. Okay. All right, so here's what we have. So that first part of the tutorial, the piece, the video took us all the way up to me having foiled the bottom part of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give myself a little bit of room here. I'm going to go ahead and move this frame out, and I'm going to move this glass out, making sure that I know what order they were in. Okay, but the red goes here. And what we're going to do is we're going to focus on these two pieces here. Make sure you can see this. All right, so this is that Studio Pro stained glass foiling tape. A lot of this stuff, Hobby Lobby seems to have a small supply of stained glass craft items, whereas places like Michael's doesn't. So finding stained glass can be challenging. I put a comment in the post there saying that buying it through Amazon is probably the easiest way, but just understand that you get what you get with the colors. You order, let's say, transparent, you're liable to get a rainbow of colors. So if you need a really big concentration of a particular color because you're doing a larger piece, keep that in mind. You may have to find other locations on the internet other than Amazon to get the bigger pieces that you want. But for our purposes, since we're working in a 5x7, this is perfect. The glass that we had is perfect. Nothing exceeds 4x6, which is the size of the glass that I purchased through Amazon. So we're good to go here. So the foiling isn't that complicated. I think the biggest part of it, two things. Number one, is extremely sticky. So if it gets on your fingers, it sticks to your fingers. And the second part, of course, is getting it as close as you can to the center. So what I mean is, see, this is the 0.56 centimeters. This has a certain thickness here. And what I want to be able to do is get this as close to the center as I can so that there's the same amount of foil on either side. And that helps with, see, that's even off. It helps with the overall aesthetic of your design when it's done, because now you have an equidistant solder seam on both sides, so the lines look much straighter. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to roll this along, pulling it tightly with my left hand and my right hand, and lay on the end that I can see, or the point that I can see right down in the center, just like that. Do it one more time here. Just going to roll it along, making sure it's in the center as close as possible. If it's a little off, that's okay. But try to do the best you can to get it in the center. And then once you go all the way around, you can grab a piece of scissors, not a piece of scissors. Give it a little bit of a snip there. And then I'm going to just fold this end in. And then with my fingers, I'm going to push this all the way around so that it sticks. And this here is the area that's going to connect. Okay, it's that overlap there. So when we put the solder on, it's going to seal along that copper. Making sure you can see this okay. It's kind of hard working with two different cameras sometimes. Here we go. Make sure that that's good there. Push this all along. Let me fix that corner. Got a little out of whack there. That's okay. We'll make that the back side. Okay, I'm going to push this up a little bit. On a firm surface, I'm just going to push down. That'll squish in everything. Then I'm going to grab my bone folder, which is right here, the trusty bone. Everybody should have a bone folder. That's what I believe. And we're just going to lightly press this along the edges, just like this. Because again, that's going to be where the solder adheres. So we want it to be smooth, because the smoother it is, the nicer it'll look. Although I'll be honest with you, having a little variation in the solder, there's something attractive about that. It kind of blends the handmade with the store made, right? You buy something from the store, it tends to be perfect, and sometimes perfection is not really. Now, if we do have a corner that's messed up like that, we can make a little patch, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a little piece of this, and I'm just going to patch that corner up, putting it right in the center. Hopefully you can see that okay. Put that right in the center there, just like that. Twist that over, and very carefully pushing it in. And you'll notice now I took care of that small gap there. So we'll push this back down. Okay, and then we'll figure out how this green one went back on here in a second, because now that I pulled it off, I don't remember which direction it was. And we're going to do the same thing with the blue one. And it gets kind of tedious after a while. If you have a huge project, you might be doing this 15, 20 times at least. But the end result is definitely worth the effort. So I'll pull some of this out. And again, right in the center. Oops. I put this right in the center here and just kind of roll this to the other side. And if you keep this nice and tight, especially with the square ones or the rectangular ones, you don't have to do a lot of eyeballing around curves and things like that. Just keep it nice and tight, push down, make sure that's done. And then we'll do the last part here. There we go. Snip it. Put the scissors away, and we'll get rid of this. Okay. And what we're going to do again is just push all this down. You'll notice I'm doing these two sides first. Now this one again looks a little bit off up there, but we can fix that. It does happen from time to time. It's nothing that can't be fixed, right? So this one, I think if you look, it's hard to see here, but there's a gap. So I'm going to fix that gap real quick. And then we're going to do some soldering, and I'll talk a little bit about that too. Now with the soldering, which is going to be coming up next, what I learned is that the solder itself melts right around 350 to 400 degrees, which means you have to have a soldering iron that heats up at least that. I had a soldering iron that did not heat up that hot, and I kept wondering why I kept getting a really bad result. And the reason was the soldering iron wasn't nearly hot enough. So I ended up going to Harbor Freight, spending, I think it was $35 for a, can you see that all right? Make sure you can see that. For a soldering gun that has adjustable temperatures on it, which is really nice. Because if I need something hotter or something cooler, I can just change the temperature. It's the Schneider brand. Again, it's only $37, which was pretty reasonable. Hopefully this takes care of that problem. And it does. Look at that. Fixed it right up. Well, actually it didn't, because I put it on the wrong edge. That's what happens when you do stuff live. You never know what's going to happen. So let me take this piece of tape off here. Fix that edge. It's helpful if you have a little bit of fingernails, because without fingernails. Okay, let's do the right edge this time, shall we? If you don't have fingernails, sometimes it makes it hard to get stuff. Just make sure you can see as good as you can, as well as you can. There we go. Just make sure this is kind of in the middle, and it is. There we go. There, that's better. And then we'll use our bone folder. Whoops, and go ahead and fix all this up. Now, when I look at this up close, I can still see an edge that's a little hanging over that I don't care for. And what I can do to fix that, and I'll show you in a second, is simply push that little end that's out up and in with an X-Acto knife. If I can find my X-Acto knife, here we go. So what I'm going to do here, it's going to be hard to see on the camera, and I apologize for that, but I'm just going to push that piece of foil up there so it's nice and straight, or as even as it can be. There we go. Perfect. All right, so far so good. Okay, let's bring this back and let's reassemble. Let's make sure you can see the whole thing. Here we go. Slide it over a little bit. All right, so this was number 1. This was 3. This was 2. Let's go ahead and put this back on too, because we can use this to square everything up. I think that looks pretty good, right? Good. Okay, so this has got to go this way. 2 is this one. This doesn't quite look right. Let's try that. There we go. That's better. I like that. That's a good fit. 3 goes in. There is a gap there. You'll notice there's a slight gap. Let's flip that around, see if I get rid of the gap at all. I think I do. Good. This was 4. This one was 5. 7 on the bottom. And 6. Now it doesn't quite line up the way it did before, so that means, let's see, that fits better that way. Now comes, if you're a puzzle person, this is the puzzle piece part. What fits the best gives you the tightest fit. I like that. That looks good. All right. Now, if we want to keep all these pieces in place, because what we're going to do is we're going to spot solder first. And what I mean by that is we're going to use some flux. And what flux is, this is safety flux, again, Hobby Lobby Studio Pro. What it does is when you put it on metal, it allows the solder to adhere to the metal, but it will not adhere to the glass. So that's important. And that was something I didn't know either, is that if you get this on the glass, don't worry about the solder sticking to it, because it won't. So you live and learn this stuff, right? But I don't want this to move out of place, so I'm going to take some thumbtacks. Grab a couple of those. What I'm going to do is, once I have this thing the way I want it, I'm just going to thumbtack in. And if you notice at the bottom of this, I'm using a piece of cork board. Pretty inexpensive. I think it was like $4 or $5 at Michael's or something like that. And the whole idea here is to keep everything from moving. Keep it all locked in place. And I'm going to put some on the other side of my frame here so that doesn't move. There we go. All right, so far so good. And I'm losing my tacks all over the floor. So it goes. All right, the flux part. Pretty easy to use. Paintbrush, flux. You dip it in and just paint where you're going to be. And all I'm doing is I'm coating the connection pieces here. I'm just going to go and cover everything up. Because when I drop the solder in there, it's going to adhere just to the foil that's covered with the flux. And again, all I'm going to do up front is I'm just going to tack it so that I can get rid of my frame, because that's exactly how things are going to be for the end product. The nice thing about solder is if you make a mistake, you can remelt it. All right, so this is Hobby Lobby solder. Hobby Lobby solder. Say that 10 times real fast. This is not 60-40. I think this is slightly different, but it does work well. So this is my soldering iron. Right now it's set to 896 degrees, almost 900 degrees. So it's certainly not a craft that you would want a little kid to play with. At the bottom of the soldering holder here, there's this sponge, and we use that to clean off the tip, because we want a clean tip, because if the tip's not clean, the solder won't melt. And all I'm going to do now is I'm going to touch the end of the soldering iron to the solder, place this close. Hopefully you can see this. And what it's going to do is it's going to leave a little drop right there. See it there? It's hard to see maybe on the camera, but all I'm doing is I'm just connecting all these pieces together. I'm just going to go through and just drop some solder in these different areas there. Doesn't have to be perfect, because we're going to be adding more solder in when we do the actual lines themselves. Now, since I am working with plastic tacks, I have to be very careful I don't inadvertently melt one of the tacks, which I've done, and that's not a nice smell, by the way. Now you'll notice that the solder is just sticking to the metal. It's not sticking to the glass. And all I'm doing is I'm going to connect everything up. Just going to put some spots down here to make sure that it's sticking together. Put one down here. Put one here. And again, you have to be very careful of the soldering iron, because it does get super hot at 900 degrees. That would give you a significant burn. Again, I'm just doing this so then I can remove the frame. And we'll put one more in just to make sure this is all secure. There we go. I'm going to clean the tip of my soldering iron off. You can't see it on the camera, but that's exactly what I'm doing. Just like that. And with that, I can now remove the frame. Make sure we put all the tacks back. I can carefully remove this because I don't need this anymore. There we go. And you'll see now this is the piece. Now, to do the actual soldering, I know that we're already at 34 minutes, but I want to make sure I at least show you how the soldering works. What I'll do is I'll solder a couple of the edges here, a couple of the ends. So since I'm a righty, I'm going to turn this a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing I did for the spots here for the tacking. And I'm just going to melt some solder in here, just like this. And I'm just going to slowly melt it. And you'll notice it's just sticking to the copper foil. It's not going anywhere else, just to the copper foil. And if there's not enough on there, drop a little bit more, and you can slowly run your soldering iron, which will melt everything and give you a nice clean beautiful line just like this. And if your soldering iron doesn't feel like it's melting like it should, it's because the tip is dirty. My tip is a little bit dirty right now, which is why I'm having a slight melting problem. However, it seems to be working okay if I take my time. And doing stained glass isn't really a hobby that you need to rush on. I think there are a lot of steps involved, right? If you remember, we had the design, we had to cut out the design, we pasted the design work on the glass after choosing the glass, right? Then we did some cutting using the pliers and the other tools that we had downstairs. And then we took it to the grinder, and with the grinder, we brought it as close as we could to the design itself. Yeah, this soldering iron really needs to be cleaned. Then after the grinding, we made sure everything fit. We then went through the copper foiling process and tacked everything together. There we go. And now we're just going to glue it all together with the solder. Just like that. Okay. And that's basically how it's done. Now we would go through and we would continue that process until our project is complete. So I know that was in a short 37 minutes. I packed a lot in. But it's so much fun to do it because you get to pick your own colors. You can come up with your own design, and there's cutting of the glass, and really it's an art form that really not a lot of people do much anymore. I think in the old days you used to see a lot more people do stained glass artwork and things like that, but these days you don't see it so much anymore, which is a shame because you can come up with some really beautiful results. So I really hope that you give it a try. I think that you would really enjoy it. It's not super expensive. I think if I were to rank it, it's probably more expensive than painting, right? With painting, you're dealing with canvases and paints and things like that. With this type of art or craft or however you want to call it, there's probably a slightly higher cost because you would want a grinder. You would want the glass itself isn't always inexpensive. But still, I think if you really want to challenge yourself and do something completely different, then stained glass is something that I would recommend you try. Now, if you do try it, by all means, let me know. I'd even love to get on a Zoom call with you and talk about it because I think we could probably learn a lot from each other as we experiment and do different things. Anyway, that's my show for this evening. Again, I'm sorry I ran a little bit long, but it's just such a fun thing. And, and being able to show this to you in demonstration format's kind of fun. And I really like doing it. So before I go, just remember, I do have a book that's out. It's called Seeking Permission. You can find it on Amazon. It's on Kindle format. And if you want the hard copy, you can order that as well. I highly encourage you to read it. I've been getting some really good reviews on it already. It tells my story about how I was able to change my story, which in and of itself is pretty amazing. But anyway, I hope you guys have a great evening, and I'll see you next week. I'm going to be speaking with author Angelique Benet from Canada. She's going to be on the show, and we're going to be talking about her book, which is coming out or is out. It's going to be an amazing show, so hopefully you guys can watch. See you next week. Thank you so very much for joining me on the Art Talk podcast, where it's my goal to bring artists together to talk about their craft. If you'd like to join me for a conversation, please reach out via email at johncoleartist@gmail.com or by visiting my website at johnrobertcole.com. So until next time, keep crafting, painting, and inspiring others with your creativity. You make more of an impact than you know. See ya.